At 4 years old, I was a prisoner in Auschwitz. I was starving, too malnourished to grow hair, and I was ripped away from my mother, my father, and older brother Shlomo. People always ask me, what do you remember? And I was 4 years old, so it's hard to know what I remember and what others, family members, have told me. I do seem to remember the smell of burning flesh in Auschwitz and the sound of marching boots. Well, life in Poland before the Nazis occupied Żarki, which is in the town that I was born in, was good. Jewish population was more than 50% of the town, and it was a thriving community. Then, of course, during the occupation, the Nazis had an open ghetto, but food was scarce, and the Nazis committed many atrocities, so things changed quite a bit.
My dad entered Auschwitz with his mother, his father, his big brother Samuel, and his grandmother Dora. And the men were taken to the men's side of camp. That included his big brother, who was 5 years older than him. My father was taken to the women's side and put in a Kinderhaus, or a children's bunk.
My mother was sent to Austria to a munitions factory to fill bullets, and my grandmother and I were in Auschwitz. My mother actually snuck me into the women's bunk, and that probably saved my life.
My grandmother at first would sneak into the children's bunk and bring my father her bread. In fact, she showed us the scars on her head from being beaten over the head by a monitor who worked in the children's bunk. But she was beaten over the head, and she still came as regularly as she could to bring him her bread. Eventually, as my father said, eventually she snuck my dad into the women's bunk to try and keep him safe. And once she did that, she wanted to know what happened to Samuel and what happened to Israel, what happened to her husband, what happened to my dad's father and his brother. So she was working one day near the men's side of camp, near the electrified fence that separates the two. She asked a group of men, can you find out what happened to Israel and Samuel Bornstein? And she learned that they had been murdered in the gas chambers. So, she wanted to kill herself, honestly. She wanted to throw herself against the electrified fence, she told us. But she knew she had my dad to protect. So, so she went back to the bunk and did what she had to do.
The first time I ever saw my liberation photo was in a movie that we saw in Indianapolis. The movie was called The Chosen.
Mass murder. Men, women, and children of all ages were branded with serial numbers.
My picture came up, and I shouted, "That's me." My tattoo number came up, and I looked at the screen, and I was just stunned. We looked on a computer to try to find that screenshot, and found it, and found that it was a Holocaust deniers group. I slammed the computer down, and we were very, very angry that they could say that.
They captioned that photo and similar photos of him, pretty healthy children for a, quote, death camp. Another photo said, this video shows the fallacy that Jews have been perpetuating, that children were killed on arrival. And it was a video of my father sitting there with other children, with these other survivors. And it really, it infuriated my dad. It infuriated me. And it was fuel to start talking and to write this book. So any hesitation my dad might have had, any fears I might have had about finishing the job, we knew this had to get done. And so thank God we did it now while we could, while there were still survivors who knew my dad and his family, while these answers were still there for the getting. Before the war, the town was predominantly Jewish, 60% Jewish. There were 3,400 Jews. Only about 27 came home, and it was pretty much all our family. It defies logic, you know. The book isn't really just my dad's story, it's the family story.
My mother had a saying, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. And even though we had absolutely terrible conditions growing up, things pass. And if you're optimistic, things will get better.
We thought when the book writing journey was over, this journey was over. We had all the information we needed or could ever want. And then, by some strange twist, we got an email one day from someone who saw my dad on TV and realized that they're the little girl sitting next to my dad in that photo from Liberation. Another little girl from that photo reached out. And amazingly, everybody lives within like a 25-mile radius.
Are you Tova?
I'm Sarah.
You're Sarah.
Here.
Oh, here it is.
This is me, this is Sarah, and this is you.
Oh my God.
Isn't
I
that
finally met you.
something?
Yeah.
This is so nice.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I've had the tattoo and it's part of me. I certainly have thought about getting it removed and changing my name to something like Born from Bornstein.
Something less Jewish.
Less Jewish because of discrimination.
You're happy you didn't have it removed.
I'm happy I didn't have it removed because I think people need to understand what happened, and that's why Survivors Club was written. The world can never forget what happens when discrimination is ignored. And it's not just discrimination against Jewish people, but against all minorities. And that includes Muslims, Mexicans, and African Americans. It's time for compassion. It's time for empathy. And it's time that we remember the past so we don't repeat it again in the future.
What can I tell you, my dear sweet son?
Who did you
I think that no one in the world have another son as I